The firm, Sears, by the way, was losing assets, such as land and property, but again, increasing cash liabilities, debt repayments, and rental payment. That allowed, of course, Sears and Kmart to crash. And I give that example here because Sean Spicer and Republicans tend to ignore those issues when it comes to capitalism. And this is unfettered capitalism, of course. Republicans push for less rules, less regulations. That's things that AOC actually believes in. And most of the American people believe in rules, regulations to make sure that these companies don't go in and screw over all the workers by loading up a company full of debt and then selling off the assets piece by piece. So now, here's the other thing. Sean Spicer said, oh my God, she's pushing socialism. AOC's a socialist. AOC isn't a socialist. She's a social democrat. Policy-wise, that's what she is. Meaning, and this is what social democrat is, let's have some democracy when it comes to our economic system. Or better yet to say, let's do things in a way that benefit the most people economically, as opposed to what we're doing now, which is only benefiting a very small slice of the population at the top. Social democracies are capitalist in nature, but they have a very strong welfare state, which again, things like universal health care, single-payer health care, debt-free college, or very, very low-cost college that is subsidized heavily. Things like daycare that is subsidized by the government or paid for by the government. Things like that. That's what social democracies that exist inside of capitalism are able to do, or what they actually do. And they try to do it in a more sustainable kind of way. And I think it's important to do it in a sustainable way because you actually can't have an economic system when your planet's on fire. But that's just me. That's just my opinion on there. It doesn't quite work. That said, Spicey does not know the definitions of any of these words. Most conservatives don't. They don't bother to learn. As socialism, communism, whatever, is basically a catch-all for anything that they don't actually like. And so my guess is Spicey isn't going to take the lesson in what is and is not socialism, because his understanding of things, and this is very important, his understanding of what that is solely dependent on a paycheck. So he gets paid to not understand these things, and so he never will. All right, there's that. Yes, I am aware that I disappeared, that I was having connection issues. But the thing about that is that as long as I can continue, the recording, the clips will still be able to go up, so you'll be able to see what you missed. So there's a method to the madness. Okay. Moving on. Since I need to try to get out here kind of quickly, I have a meeting after the show. So let's do it. Following these shutdowns from the coronavirus pandemic, you had I should say during the shutdowns. So let's go back. During the shutdowns, during the coronavirus pandemic, you ended up having a lot less carbon dioxide and methane emissions. A lot of places, a lot less travel that were, places that were shut down, workplaces, a lot of people that were working from home. And so you had this pretty significant reduction in carbon emissions. Now that we're all kind of getting back to business, getting back to normal, so to speak, well, it turns out that those emissions, they're back. And they're back in a pretty big way. In fact, in a new report, the International Energy Agency is saying that the money that world governments have spent to prop up their economies during the coronavirus pandemic have mainly gone to developing fossil fuels. And so that money is going back to fossil fuel development. And as we return back to our previous economic situation, with things beginning to open back up, or in some places in America, never really closed down, and people going back to work, back into the office, things like that. Well, all that stuff is, again, adding to our levels of carbon dioxide. And so, yeah. Now, it's not a good thing, especially considering that only 2% of the $16 trillion in world spending have gone to clean energy development. There went our chance to take the coronavirus pandemic and do something positive when it comes to realigning the way that the world gets energy. So that's a missed opportunity. Another missed opportunity, by the way, is in the US when it comes to healthcare, where we didn't take the opportunity to get single-payer healthcare, to push for that. And instead, we continue to do this disastrous for-profit healthcare system under the ACA. And so that's another terrible missed opportunity. But let me get more into this report. So Fatih Birol, executive director of the IEA, went after some of the rich governments that promised a green recovery from the pandemic, but have so far refused to, quote, put their money where their mouth is. Research published last month, according to Common Dreams, revealed that between January 2020 and March 2021, the governments of the wealthy G7 nations poured tens of billions of dollars more into fossil fuels than renewable energy, on top of being far from what's needed to put the world on the path to reaching net zero by mid-century. Bureau said that the money allocated to green energy measures thus far is not even enough to prevent global emissions from surging to a new record. And unfortunately, that's what we're doing. We're not just getting back to normal. We are spiking. We're getting even worse. We're putting out even more carbon dioxide and methane emissions. Now, Birol says this, quote, governments need to increase spending and policy action rapidly to meet the commitments they made in Paris back in 2015. Including the vital provision of financing by advanced economies to the developing world. But then they must go even further by leading clean energy investment and deployment to much greater heights beyond the recovery period in order to shift the world onto a pathway to net zero emissions by 2050, which is narrow but still achievable if we act now. So, the IEA's analysis, which examines roughly 800 policies implemented throughout the coronavirus crisis by more than 50 countries, finds that a full and timely implementation of the economic recovery measures would result in CO2 emissions surging to an all-time high in 2023 and continuing to rise in the following years, wiping out the pandemic-related emissions drop. So all of that, of course, is pretty important. They say that we want to get to net zero by 2050. That apparently is not going to happen, since we're putting all this recovery money, or we did put all this recovery money, we and other nations, developed nations, into more fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. It's disastrous. And so Bureau plans to present the IEA's new report to the leaders of the G20, which, according to research published Tuesday morning, handed more than $3.3 trillion in subsidies to fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accord was finalized in 2015. Disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. In fact, Antha Williams, the environmental lead at Bloomberg Philanthropies, which helps conduct the subsidy research, told The Guardian, quote, the action taken by these countries up until this point is a far cry from what is needed. As a host of climate emergencies intensifies around the world, the continued development of fossil fuel infrastructure is nothing short of reckless. We need more than just words. We need action. Well, you're not going to see that from the Biden administration. look, this is distressing for several reasons. Okay. Right now, we have hotter temperatures, stronger storms, flooding in places, flooding in some places, droughts in others. And we're back to doing next to nothing about it. Yes, the Keystone XL pipeline is gone. That's great. But what about all the other pipelines? You have Line 3, Enbridge, that pipeline. In fact, you have water protectors that are being arrested. You also have Biden's budget that still makes massive investments in fossil fuels in order to, quote, placate the centrist Democrats. Let me give you an example. On Wednesday, the Biden administration defended in federal court the Willow Project, which is a huge oil drilling operation proposed in Alaska that was approved previously by the Trump administration. Weeks later, it backed, once again, another Trump project, another Trump decision to grant over 440 oil and gas leases on federal land in Wyoming. Also this month, the Biden administration declined to act when it had an opportunity to stop crude oil from continuing to flow through the contested 2,700-mile Dakota Access Pipeline, which, by the way, still lacks a federal permit. So the Biden administration could say, no, there's no permit. Let's not have oil flow through that. But again, right now, the Biden administration, while doing some positive things on climate, still is bending over backwards to appease people that have already been bought by the fossil fuel industry. Again, you have Republicans and Democrats, centrist corporate Democrats. This is why we can't do anything big and bold with the climate at a time where we absolutely need to do big and bold. But again, fossil fuel companies have bought out the Republican Party, lock, stock, and barrel. They own the entire Republican Party. And then you have the Democratic Party that also has a lot of people that were bought by fossil fuels. For example, you had that Exxon lobbyist admit that he basically owns Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, among many so-called moderate Democrats. In fact, that's who they target with their messaging. That's who they target with their money. What Biden is doing, the Biden administration, is basically doing what little that they're allowed to do by the corporate masters, which is not actually going to do anything to impact the fossil fuel industry in such a negative way. Yes, investment in solar and wind, that's good for jobs, and it's good for PR, but it's not enough, and it's not moving fast enough to hit even the modest goals. That long goal by hitting net zero or of hitting net zero by 2050, that ain't going to happen at this pace. And if it does, again, right now, we're on point to increase emissions. We'll have passed the tipping point. This is why we have to, and this is what the most important lesson here is. Get the money out of politics. Understand that until we do, understand that the donors don't care what happens 30 to 50 to 100 years down the road. They're making money. They're making a profit. And by the time that climate change will actually impact them, they'll be dead. So they don't care. They're absolutely fine with taking the rest of us down with them. Because again, poor nations, by the way, poorer nations are being hit first and will be hit the hardest. Richer nations, and especially rich people, are not going to be as affected by the ravages of climate change. And so again, by the time it does affect them, they'll be long dead. Or would theoretically affect them. They'd be long dead. And so that's why we have to get them out of the equation. The fossil fuel companies out of the equation so that we can actually do something positive about the climate and save civilization, essentially. I know that sounds like, I don't know, alarmist and extreme. I think we're past the point of being alarmist, and we absolutely should be. We should be more alarmist, because this is the most serious issue facing not only the country, but mankind. Okay. Damn it. I wanted to do the Frito-Lay story, the striking story, the striking Frito-Lay workers. That's a really important story. I'm gonna have to do that tomorrow, because I don't. Unfortunately, right now, I don't actually have time, which sucks. Oh, look at that. We've got a moron here. Okay, anyway, I'm sorry. I had some issues, but I do want to thank, go back here and thank someone for the $5 super chat. I do really appreciate that. But again, I have a meeting here in like 3 minutes, so I gotta go. But thank you all. I do appreciate you. Thank you for the new follows on Twitch. Thank you to the YouTube audience. Unfortunately, the stream got cut off. Everybody check out the clips. See what you missed. Good segments. And we'll see you all tomorrow. Remember, change begins with you. Love you guys. And we'll see you all later.
Tighten up my knee.
Wet ass keyword.
Give me a break.
Dumps. Big, massive dumps.
They're kicking me out the door. They're kicking me out the door.